got an exciting evening tonight, and delighted to have Art Robinson here, who's one of my favorite scientists in the world. Some scientists adapt to the world and adjust to the world and end up assimilating to the world. Art has that kind of granitic integrity that changes the world and defies its most overwhelming and politically correct messages. And this really began at Caltech, where he was a student of Linus Pauling, and later joined Linus Pauling at what became the Pauling Institute, where they studied the impact of vitamin C and nutrition on cancer and other diseases. And after 15 years with Linus Pauling, Pauling decided that vitamin C in mega doses could halt intercontinental missiles in full flight toward American cities. And Art had been doing studies on mice with vitamin C and decided that actually it would accelerate the arrival of the intercontinental missiles. I may not have got this exactly correct, but it's but since then Art has started his own institute, the Oregon Institute of Science and Medicine, and he also where he does all sorts of research with his 7 children whom he homeschooled in his entirety. And the homeschooling program he created is now used by how many thousands and thousands of people across the country. It's one of the best homeschool curriculums that he developed for his children. And then Peter Beckman, who was writing Access to Energy, which is one of this newsletter, when it comes in the mail, it's almost the only thing I read in its entirety every day when it comes. It's been getting difficult because they tend to come in 4 or 5 at once now. He's trying to beat me down, and I've gotten a bit behind. But it's just wonderful letter that discusses energy and the various futilities of solar fantasies, but also has addressed the issue of global warming with great cogency and persistence for 7 or 8 years now. It was Art who got the 17,000 scientists to subscribe to a statement against human-caused global warming. This overwhelening consensus of science on global warming has yet to produce 17,000 signers to any particular position. Any case, Art is a miracle of originality and integrity, and we're lucky to have him here tonight to discuss these new applications in medicine. Sorry.
Well, thanks very much, and thank you, George, for giving me this opportunity. I want to, in the next few minutes, talk with you about something that I hope you will do. There's something that needs to be done, I think, very much in medicine, and the entrepreneurs and technologists of the telecosm are the exact right people to do it. So I would like to take this opportunity to talk with you about it. Principally, and I'll describe in detail, principally it involves moving diagnostic medicine into the hands of the consumers, taking the diagnostic tools of medicine, the technological tools, and making computer peripherals out of them, and also making them on-person monitors, and turning the internet into an interpretive tool so that the consumers of medicine can evaluate the product that they receive, and medicine itself can be turned into a therapeutic industry competing on the basis of quality and price. That's the idea that I want to present. And there's a thing here, okay. The first two slides summarize it. This is my youngest son, Matthew, and his dog, Rusty. If Matthew takes Rusty to the veterinarian can take a blood sample from Rusty, put it in a computer peripheral beside his PC, which costs $1,000, get the analysis in a few minutes, diagnose Rusty, and go on about his business. It will measure the same couple of dozen things that will be measured if you go to a physician and he takes a normal blood sample. Some veterinarians, in fact, send their samples to the local hospital and put them through the normal medical devices for humans. In any case, the veterinary can do this for Rusty, but he can't do it for Matthew. If he measured Matthew's sample, that would be unlawful. If a physician had this device in his office, he also couldn't use it. That also would be unlawful. The only people allowed to use the devices to make these measurements are approved commercial clinical laboratories, and most of those laboratories would not measure the sample if Matthew asked them to do it. But there is an out. Matthew can measure his own sample. If he does it himself, that's lawful. Medicine is an odd industry because it controls, it's a monopoly, of course, and this monopoly controls not only the product it produces, but it controls the evaluation of its own product. This is the result not of some machinations, but just a historical result. Initially, of course, medicine had very little technology, and what was known about medicine resided in the minds of the physicians, and you needed to use their talents. In their minds was everything that you had available. As technology developed for medicine, especially diagnostic technology, this technology involved very expensive machinery. It involved during a time when computers were very expensive, and it was just not possible for the people who were being helped by medicine to handle their own diagnostic work. And the industry grew up, which I think is about a $100 billion industry today, measuring samples commercially. But as the monopoly matured, these commercial laboratories disappeared behind the gatekeepers of medicine, so that an individual cannot evaluate the product he's getting. He can't use high technology, and moreover, the technology advances at a slow rate because medicine is a fairly conservative thing. Now, I'll describe in these pictures what we're up against. This is an aging curve for human beings. It shows the number alive versus time. And at a fairly early age, in the 30s, people start to die off. And it isn't just a question of death, of course, because there's great suffering associated with this matter. This is the way the curve should look. If you're a university research professor and you're studying aging, you wouldn't think of studying an experimental system that had that gradual curve. If you were studying fruit flies, their aging curve would look like the blue one, square. Each fruit fly would get a full most shot at his intrinsic lifespan. They're cold-blooded, so you can change their lifespan with temperature and so forth. But the curve would be square. If it were rounded like the human curve, you wouldn't like that for an experimental system because something else would be going on, not just aging. Same thing is true of mouse curves. Any system in science which studies intrinsic aging needs a square curve, and so do humans. The square curve, of course, means that each person is getting a full lifetime, and death is occurring near the intrinsic lifespan over a fairly short period. This curve also illustrates one of the reasons medicine is so expensive, because medical intervention is occurring between the ages of 30 and 100. It should be occurring between the ages of 80 and 100. The problem is to increase human health, to square that curve. That's the first goal, should be the first goal of medicine. A second goal would be to extend the curve, make the intrinsic lifespan longer. And we know from experiments on animals, for example, aging experiments on animals and so forth, especially experiments with restricted diets, that 20 to 25% is possible in almost all animal systems and is probably possible for man, again, if we do the right things. The next one is, of course, futuristic. If science ever determines the molecular clock for aging, and we find it's a clock we can intervene in, who knows how long we can live. That's a different issue. The thing that holds back medicine, the thing that holds back the advances of squaring that curve and perhaps extending it to a higher level is the quantitative measurement of health. It's necessary to be able to measure quantitatively to make an advance. And yet, it's very difficult to measure health quantitatively. We haven't had the tools. Here are three examples of why you might wish to do that. In the top one, Suppose you could measure the percentage of life remaining to you, or at least your physiological age, quantitatively. Then things change. If somebody tells you you'll live longer if you eat vitamin E, or you'll live longer if you exercise, or you eat your veggies or whatever, you can do those things, and if you could measure your physiological age quantitatively, then you would have the opportunity of drawing graphs, make the measurements frequently, see if the thing that you have changed about your life has changed the rate of aging, positively or negatively, improved things. In fact, almost everything that's advocated as an anti-aging idea has not been tested. It hasn't been tested because aging experiments on human beings take too long to perform. But if we could measure age quantitatively, they could be performed quickly. A second thing is the probability of illness. People should be fighting the probability of disease, not disease itself. But for that, you have to be able to measure quantitatively the probability of illness. And thirdly, if you do get sick, you need to be able to measure your sickness quantitatively. Often people will talk to me about themselves or their relatives because we worked in cancer a little bit. You know, what should I do? They develop cancer. The physician suggests 3 or 4 things to them. The alternative medicine and their friends suggest other things to them. Maybe they have 8 different ideas that they could apply to attacking their cancer or their loved one's cancer. But what do? They pick the one that looks the best and close their eyes and see if they die. That shouldn't be that way. You should pick a method. You should watch the rate of growth of the cancer as a function of time, see if it's improved by what you're doing or made worse by what you're doing, and have the ability to change, modulate, and adjust the illness. But you need to be able to measure illness quantitatively. The tools to do this are not available to you today. They just aren't there. In fact, the tools, I started out talking about Rusty and his dog, those measurements are 50 years obsolete. They measure the same couple dozen parameters they measured 50 years ago, and they compare each one to the so-called normal range. And if it's 2 standard deviations out of the normal range, they look in their medical books or their memory and say, gee, if that one's that far out, it must mean such and such. Most of the information, and even those 2 dozen numbers, is ignored because each number has a magnitude, and even if you classified them as above or below the mean, you'd have 2 to the 20th different patterns. You can obtain tremendous amounts of information out of profiling small molecules in urine, blood, breath, and saliva of human beings, but this is not done. In the 70s, we set out to do it. I was young and naive, and I thought all we have to do is develop improved procedures for medicine, and we'll improve people's lives. And Linus and our coworkers and I invented a new subject. It was called metabolic profiling by us. It's now called Metabolomics. But this subject involved extracting information from the normal metabolites that are found in urine, breath, blood, saliva, and looking in those profiles for patterns that were indicative of the things which I showed on those linear axes. Basically, you take 50 or 100 or 200 parameters, however many you can measure, and you squash those onto a linear decision axis like the ones I showed. We developed this very well. We published 20 papers on it, worked out all the math, demonstrated that we could measure age quantitatively. We could take a sample from each of you and let the machines we developed in the 70s sniff the sample and get its smell. It'd measure a couple hundred compounds, and it would be unique to you. You could come back to telecosm 11. We could do the same thing, and the computer could tell which of you pair all the samples because you are biologically unique as well. But this never helped anyone. It didn't help them because it was not commercialized, was not applied. It involved, the computers were difficult to maintain and expensive, the machines were expensive. It could only have been applied in the commercial medical laboratories, and they weren't interested, and so this discipline developed, but it's never really helped human beings. I thought you might enjoy this. This is part of the way we funded that research. I used to write ads in the Wall Street Journal. The first ad has to do with raising money for research on cancer in mice. We studied nutrition as a function of cancer. We discovered that you could change the rate of growth of squamous cell carcinoma in mice 20-fold just by changing the diet. One of the reasons we stopped working together was that we discovered that cancer grew twice as fast if you fed the mice a lot of vitamin C. But this is not a comment against vitamin C. The fact is you can starve cancer, and vitamin C was probably improving their nutritional health and the nutritional health of the cancer. The second slide illustrates some of Linus's interest at the time. And the third, the thing I'm talking about today. I wrote that ad in the Wall Street Journal when I was 35. It means more to me now. And we chose to analyze metabolites. There are lots of things you can analyze. You've read about them in the newspaper. You can look at the DNA. The DNA is very useful. On the other hand, if you had a leak in the roof of your house, you wouldn't suddenly rush to your filing cabinet and look for the design drawings of your house. You would look more carefully, more specifically at what was wrong. The DNA carries information. Proteins carry information. And of course, the scanning machines carry lots of information, as he is going to talk about. Seeing bumps and blockages and so forth that occur inside our bodies. But the greatest amount of information is in the metabolites, the small molecules that are produced and consumed in the normal course of metabolism. They carry more information because they're actually where the action is, and they show you what's happening. They also carry information because they're all interlocked in different biochemical pathways. So you don't have to measure any specific ones. There may be 5,000 of them in there. If you make a sampling of 200, those 200 are carrying information about the other 4,800. So that, for example, 30% of the substances in your urine are correlated with your physiological age. Some go up with age, some go down with age. It isn't necessary to measure 5,000 compounds. You can measure 200, and that gives you enough information to determine how old you are. When we were doing this, we used expensive technology. We built high-resolution chromatographs, and we actually built the first molecular ion mass spectrometer for this purpose. This is a picture of an old analyzer from the 70s at Stanford. This thing smells urine, takes the smell of the urine, and also analyzes breath, gets a couple of hundred compounds, and you can do nice pattern recognition on it and get a lot of information. This illustrates the use of that in that time period. We had in mind the man puts his urine in the analyzer, and then it's analyzed. That's Linus. I put him up on the ladder with the vitamin C in his pocket, and there's sugar in the wastebasket. But the point is, this slide also shows why we didn't help anybody. Fancy analyzers, specialized interpretation. This all was expensive and was never delivered because it could only be delivered by big commercial laboratories. In those days, computer work was very hard, and we had just PDP-11s. We had the first PDP-11 at Stanford. We were very advanced, we thought. And this is me signing a long-term contract with my systems programmer. She was a wonderful woman. She was a great programmer, and also we had 6 children. This shows Laura Lee at work. I thought you might enjoy this. That was the advanced computer. The deck tapes are 256K, and if you look very carefully, you can see that our greatest pride and joy, it's an RK05 with a disk memory with 1 megabyte. But she also, I'll use her as an illustration, like I used Matthew. We had 6 children, and she's going along. We're working together, and she got a stomachache. So she went to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, I think you have a bowel obstruction, and he gave her a laxative and sent her home. But a couple months later, she had the same thing. So she went back. He told her the same thing. And then one day, all the kids got a stomachache. Everybody in the family had the flu. All the kids had a tummy ache, and so did their mother. And I said, well, you want me to take you into the doctor? And she says, well, no, it's late at night. The emergency room's an hour away, and it takes $1,000. They'll charge us $1,000, and probably won't find out anything anyway. I'll see how I feel in the morning. Well, she didn't need a doctor in the morning. She was dead. She died of hemorrhagic pancreatitis, which could have been analyzed by the most primitive profiler imaginable, and she'd have been under a surgeon knife and alive, but she wasn't. She was dead because diagnostic medicine was behind gatekeepers, and the gatekeepers were a long ways away for a sick lady in the middle of the night. She was sort of on the top of that little curve. Now, there are always expensive machines. There will always be fancy, expensive machines. This is a commercial molecular ion mass spectrometer we use in our lab today. It weighs 3 tons and costs $1 million, and we can do wonderful things with it, but we can't deliver mass medicine to human beings, even with special capabilities it may have, because it also would wind up residing behind the gatekeepers. But it is possible to solve this problem today because they're beginning to put chromatographs and electrophoresis things on chips. They're building mass spectrometers you can practically hold in the palm of your hand. And the technology has gotten to the point where these analytical devices can be put in boxes like laser printers and put beside the computers that people have in their homes. I've passed out these things. There's some details about this. If anyone's especially interested, they might wish to read, but I won't go into all of it. This is a little discussion of things that we didn't do. But this is what it's possible to do today. We measured about 200 parameters in the 70s. You can measure about 300 today, I would estimate, in urine, breath, saliva, or blood by an analytical device that could sit on the desktop, be mass-produced, and sold in office supply stores. Breath analyzers are especially interesting because as those advance, you can get to the point where you could analyze the guy while he sits at his computer without him even putting a sample in. And this is not science fiction. The scientists at Jason have suggested putting these machines in public laboratories to smell the profiles of the people going into public restrooms as a way of detecting bioterrorism, because they might detect the increases in infectious diseases in the population. These patterns, of course, can then be utilized in the ways that I've mentioned. It's also important that you can put on-time monitors on people today. If you go to Phoenix, you go outside Phoenix, there's a wonderful nuclear power plant. It has 3 nuclear reactors, 3 steam turbine generators, and each of those 3 generators generates twice the power of Hoover Dam, 6 times the power of Hoover Dam in 3 machines. They have shafts, you know, the drive shafts are like this, and big bearings. They don't wait for those bearings to squeak and then put them on a stress test or a treadmill or something and see what's wrong with them. They embed in the casings, in the castings, little vibration sensors. And the sensor vibrates, and they develop a computerized record of its personality, and then they can know if the personality changed. And if it does, they start looking at the bearing. You can do the same thing with your heartbeat. With a wristwatch, with a transponder that downloads into your PC, there's no reason why you shouldn't have a record of all of your heartbeats for the last 10 years. And that would, upstairs, downstairs, excited, not excited, asleep, awake, sick, well, everything. It's a profile. And if you had that, I think we would probably be able to see patterns that would be useful to you if the pattern of your heartbeat changed. So single parameters or a few parameters could actually be measured on people and hundreds off of people. With this information accumulated and with measurements frequent, because they would now be cheap because you control the equipment. With cheap measurements, you can get a lot of measurements, and then you have longitudinal data, which is even more valuable because now you can take biochemical individuality out of the calculations. You know what your profiles already look like. That's a whole different world than comparing your profile to the population. That too can be done once the analyzers are in the hands of the people that are being looked at. Now, some things are still going to be too expensive. Obviously, you can't put these wonderful MRI and X-ray imaging machines on the desktop. However, you could put them in shopping centers, give the guy $50, put him in the analyzer, give him a CD, and let him take it home and play it into the internet for someone to interpret it for him. There's no reason why even this technology has to remain behind a medical gatekeeper. And then, once analyzers, both on-person analyzers, peripherals for computers and so forth, are built, there's no a competitive industry and the internet on interpretation of these things can grow up and provide far better analysis of this data than can happen to be provided by the doctor you happen to know, or even a particular guy who analyzes with a particular machine. The competitive industry, the competitive abilities in the entire internet with all of the people that understand software and mathematics in the world looking at this data and competing on the basis, again, of quality and price, would provide much better things. And there are very good doctors, too, but take the best ones and clone them and put them on the internet, too. It isn't necessary to have a guy in a white coat standing there that it took a month to see and is going to cost a lot of money to kind of look at things, when kind of looking at things doesn't work anymore because there are hundreds of parameters and they're all going up and down. And you saw a lecture the first day on how hard it is to just do 80 for the military. Price is important because if this can be done cheaply, it can be mass-produced and improve the lives of hundreds of millions of people. But it isn't just a moral question, it's also a practical question, even for those people who have lots of money. You may think, it doesn't matter what these things cost because I can pay the price. But they won't be there. They won't be there unless they are used by a large number of people, because it will take an industry like that to cause them to develop. Nobody developed the wonderful little computer I have in my laboratory for my research work. They never would have done that. They developed it for mass uses that don't interest me. And in this case, although it's morally interesting to improve the health of everyone, it's also true that the wealthiest will not have good technology and good improvements in their health. They suffer and die from the same things that the poor and middle class do, and they'll continue to until these things are applied to large numbers of people. This, I summarize, you'll see on the thing, a couple of ways. It's the same thing as I've just said. But basically, the internet, we did have in the metabolomics realm, the metabolic profiling realm, the one that as a young man I thought we were going to really change medicine with and square those curves, and discovered that we got the technology developed, but it wasn't used because of its expense and because of there was an industry that could have used it, but that industry is a very conservative one and difficult to change. The technology was very difficult. The analytical technology was difficult. The computers were ridiculous. I think I spent half my time making our computer systems work and playing with them in the laboratory. And the information transfer was very expensive too. So there was no way this could be done in the 70s, even though these are ideas and arose and were proved then. But now, the analytical technology can be made miniaturized and cheap. The computers, everybody's already got a computer in his kitchen table that'll do this job, control the machinery and do the things you need to do at home. And with information transfer free, he has access to the entire world for the interpretation of his data. I think that this is an important thing to do. The people who built the telecosm are the people who can do it. They have the engineering talent, they've solved problems much more difficult than this, and they've gone up against monopolies as difficult as a medical monopoly, and won. The people in telecosm have the ability to do this. I think if they did, at telecosm 20, probably not telecosm 15, but at telecosm 20, there would be general agreement in the room. The most important thing that came out of the telecosm was a revolution in medicine, which extended the human lifespan, decreased human suffering, and by reducing the cost of medical care, freed enormous amounts of capital into the free market that we are currently wasting on our obsolete medical system. So I urge you to do this. Do it for the scientists and engineers of previous generations that made it possible. Do it for the people whose lives would be enhanced now, and do it to enhance your own lives too. And do it quick, because I'm 64 years old and I want to live to be 100 too. Thank you.